Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to dive into a really fascinating paper that explores one of history's most powerful and, let's be honest, most controversial tools for making big changes in society, the general strike.
The paper we're looking at kicks off with a premise that I think a lot of us can probably relate to. It's that feeling that our usual political tools, voting, calling your representative, they just don't seem to be working for the really big transformative goals. And the authors argue that to break through what they call oligarchic control, which is really just a way of saying a system where a small group of financial and political elites kind of call all the shots, you need something with a lot more muscle, a much more direct and powerful form of leverage. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the problem the paper identifies. Then we'll get into this historical tool they're talking about. After that, we'll explore the major roadblocks, especially in the US. And finally, we'll look at the actual blueprint the paper lays out for the modern era.
All right, first up, let's really get into the core problem that the paper is trying to solve. What's their diagnosis of our current political situation?
The basic argument here is that for a whole lot of people, the system has just stopped listening. It's become fundamentally unresponsive to what the majority needs on these huge life-or-death issues like healthcare costs or wages that just won't budge. And this diagnosis is the whole setup, right? It's why the paper argues that we need to look beyond the ballot box to force some real systemic change.
Okay, so what is this massive tool the paper suggests could be the answer? Let's define what a general strike actually is and dig into its history, which is honestly pretty wild.
Yeah, this is absolutely not your typical strike. We're not talking about one union at one company trying to get a better contract. A general strike is the whole shebang. The goal is to bring the entire economic system to a grinding halt, all to force massive political change at the highest level. It's like using the collective power of everyone who works as a kind of ultimate veto over the government.
And this right here really nails the difference. It's all about ambition. A normal strike? That's about negotiating a better deal inside the system we already have. But a general strike, the way the paper frames it, is about changing the system itself. It's not aiming for a better contract, it's aiming to rewrite the rules of the entire game. And get this idea is not some modern invention. The paper makes the case that it's ancient. We're talking all the way back to the Roman Republic. It's a fascinating story. I mean, this is incredible. It shows the raw, simple power of just not showing up for work. The common people of Rome, the plebeians, wouldn't start a riot. They would just pack up and leave the city. And poof, the whole economy just stops. Suddenly, the elites have no one to grow their food, no one to make their goods, no one for the army. That total paralysis is what forced them to the negotiating table. It's non-violent, but incredibly powerful. And here's the kicker. This wasn't about a temporary win. It wasn't for a one-time pay raise. These actions won permanent, structural changes to Roman society. They created a whole new political office, the tribune of the plebes, whose only job was to protect regular citizens by vetoing unfair laws. They literally rewrote the Constitution. Okay, let's fast forward to the 20th century, because you see this tactic pop up again and again. In 1905 Russia, it's what forced an absolute monarch, the Tsar, to actually grant a constitution. In 1920 Germany, a general strike is what crushed a right-wing military coup in just 5 days. And in 1980s Poland, it was the strikes of the Solidarity movement that helped bring down the entire communist regime. So this table from the paper really lays it all out. You see these incredible successes, winning institutional change, defending democracy, even toppling governments. But you also see a really important failure, the one in the UK in 1926. And that's a key lesson, right? It shows that if the government can keep the lights on and the trains running and basically just wait you out, even a huge strike can fizzle out.
So all of this leads to the big question, right? If this is such a powerful tool, why don't we ever see it in the United States? Well, the paper argues the US is a very special case, and it all comes down to the law.
And the paper zeroes in on this one single legal doctrine. It's called the Mackay Radio Doctrine from a 1938 Supreme Court case. And the insight here is just devastating. This one ruling essentially took away American labor's biggest weapon by saying, sure, you can go on strike, but your boss can hire someone to permanently take your job.
Just think about the impact of that. It completely changes the game. A strike goes from being a temporary tactic to get a better deal to this massive, terrifying gamble where you could lose everything. Your job, your income, your family's security. It's not just leverage anymore, it's an existential threat.
And if Mackay was the legal theory, the Patco strike in '81 was when it became harsh reality. When President Reagan fired over 11,000 striking air traffic controllers and banned them for life, it sent a shockwave through the entire country. The message from the very top was crystal clear. The old partnership between labor and government was dead. Open season on unions was declared.
So when you put it all together, you see this whole web of barriers that is pretty unique to the US. You've got Mackay, which means you can be permanently replaced. You've got the Patco precedent, where the government itself might come after you. And then you have other laws, like the National Labor Relations Act, that are written to basically say you can only strike for very narrow things, like your own contract, not for big political goals.
Okay, so things look pretty bleak, right? But despite all these roadblocks, the paper points out that something is starting to shift. We're seeing a real resurgence in strikes and some new creative strategies.
I mean, just look at the numbers. The number of striking workers in the US basically doubled in 1 year. But what's really crucial here, and what the paper points to, is the kind of demands. The UAW strike, for example, wasn't just about more pay. They were fighting to get rid of those unfair two-tier wage systems and demanding cost of living adjustments. These are bigger, structural ideas that help all workers, not just their own members.
And then the paper points to this brilliant tactic from Italy as a model for the future. You had these grassroots unions who did something really smart. They explicitly connected the dots for the public. They said, you see these cuts to your healthcare, to your pensions? It's because that money is being spent over here on the military. They didn't just protest austerity, they framed it as a direct choice the government was making and made that trade-off impossible for anyone to ignore.
Okay, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. How in the world could a general strike overcome all of these American roadblocks? Well, the paper doesn't just leave us with a problem. It actually lays out a pretty detailed blueprint for how it could work.
All right, so according to the paper, it all comes down to 4 key things. First, it has to be independent. The leadership can't be tied to any of the existing political parties. Second, the demands have to be super clear and unified. Not 100 different things, but maybe just 1 or 2 big goals like UBI and universal healthcare. Third, and this is how you beat Mackay, you need overwhelming scale. So many millions of people that firing everyone is just unthinkable. It would break the economy. And fourth, it has to be a huge coalition, bringing unions together with students, civil rights groups, you name it.
So in the end, the paper leaves us with this really powerful, provocative question. It makes a compelling case, right? That when the normal political channels are clogged, the general strike has historically been the ultimate nonviolent tool for people to reclaim their power. The real question it leaves for us to think about is this blueprint for doing it again actually possible today?